Hello, my name is Chris Snipes, and you are listening to The Melt. In the 90s, I spent a good deal of time in New Age bookstores. Not because I was particularly fond of Tibetan singing bowls and dream catchers, then a novelty and not yet available at truck stops, but more because I felt that there I might have a slight chance of rubbing elbows with some semi-like-minded person who gave the time of day to things that people in mainstream reality would condescendingly snicker at. Whilst ambling around in the New Age bookstore circuit of the greater St. Louis region, I came across a good deal of folks who called themselves shamans. At this point in my life, I had heard of and read some Mircea Eliade and enough anthropological texts to know that the title of shaman is not something one acquires by merely pronouncing it so. I saw shamanism romanticized and diluted into a practice that could be found in a strip mall. Gone were the initiatory tales of one's body getting dismembered by a demon who then devoured your body parts, or of falling into a vast void only to find oneself disintegrating into shimmering molecules. When today's guest, Maestro Hamilton Souther, first went to Peru back in the early 2000s, he didn't realize that soon after he would be a CEO and a master shaman ushering hundreds of groups of people through their transformative experiences. Being a shaman is not a glamorous endeavor. You have to be very dedicated to this work, and Hamilton is definitely that. I begin the conversation by asking Hamilton what put shamanism on his radar in the first place.
Oh, it's a good question. You know, I was actually raised in a family that was completely based in Western science. My father was a surgeon and my mother was a nurse. And I grew up in what is now Silicon Valley. At the time, it was the San Jose area of California, and grew up really in a, really normal suburban childhood, for the late 70s, early 80s, and, through high school, et cetera, and university. And I studied anthropology in the university. I went to the University of Colorado at Boulder, and I studied anthropology there. And that was when I first started to learn about the origins of cultures and the origins of different kinds of tribal peoples. And I heard about shamanism, from ethnographies and things that I had read, but it still wasn't on my radar in any kind of really specific way. I mean, they were interesting stories and obviously part of exams and stuff that we took, but it was the year after I graduated from the university, I had a spiritual awakening, and it was spontaneous. It happened out of the blue. It was not something that was in my trajectory or horizon. At the time, I was actually practicing to be a professional athlete. And so going down a spiritual path and direction was not what I was thinking about. And literally from one day to the next, I started having visionary experiences. And in the experiences, I was very skeptical at first, whether or not there was, factual reality behind them. And I actually did two things. I started to seek out a spiritual explanation, and I also went to a psychologist to see what they had to say about it. And the psychologist told me that I thought I was having a literal experience and that there was really nothing wrong with what was happening, and I was basically emotionally and mentally stable, and was released from the counseling. I was actually kicked out. and that left me with the shamanism. And so I turned to shamanism specifically because it had in its history and the mythology associated with it more experiences that were akin to what was happening to me. And so the visionary experiences ultimately turned out to be, shamanic in context. And so I found something of a kindred spirit there that I could relate to, both in from traditional cultures and people that had been practicing shamanism and talking about it. And so that's kind of where it started. And then it was a unbelievably fast transformation. It really took over my life very quickly. It really took about 6 weeks to go from the original spiritual awakening to, being told in vision what would happen and where to go and what to do. Wow. And ultimately started to follow that guidance. The guidance was really specific, and I was coming from the scientific background, very testing of it. And so I would demand absolute specificity, and it came through that way. And so it let me know I had shifted in a paradigm of awareness or consciousness into something that was very hard to explain and ultimately needed some kind of training. And the visions told me that I was going to go on a journey/quest. And at the end of that journey, I was going to find shamans that were going to train me, and that ultimately I was going to become a shaman, which I thought sounded like delusional fantasy. And I also thought it sounded like a great book. So I thought to give it a test and go on the journey to see whether or not I actually found the shamans or not. And it turned out in my life that I did. And the sort of prophetic experience came true, and I started to live with them and train with them, and was considered a graduate or master shaman by the age of 25.
That's amazing. It's obviously meant to be.
It felt that way. A calling is something that's fundamentally real in shamanism, and I don't think it's in the Western culture it's presented as something kind of extraordinary and special, but I don't really think of it that way. I think of it as just extraordinary simply because it's just outside the box. But when you're are kind of tapped into something and you just find ease in the practice of it and it comes naturally to you, you kind of gravitate towards that. And for me, the Amazonian practices ultimately were like that. It was like I had finally found something that I really resonated with and that I could fully get into. And school had never really felt that way. I had gone through school and, I enjoyed different aspects of it. I enjoyed learning, but it never felt really encompassing and really, something that drew me completely in. And the same thing about other careers didn't feel that same way either. And then when I got involved in Amazonian shamanism, it was, fully immersive from the environment I was living in. I was living off grid, deep in the forest. I was part of a community of 10 families upriver from where I lived. There were no inhabitants. I was living in literally primary Amazon forest, virgin forest. In our camp, jaguar prints would be there in the morning. There were giant anacondas in the river. We would fish to eat and lived off of the land. And I, at the age of 23, got the opportunity to literally relearn a whole new lifestyle of living in the forest in an environment so foreign to what I had grown up in that it was literally like starting over. And the people actually were unbelievably kind and accepting of me and taught me, not only how to survive, but also how to thrive in that space. And it was a really beautiful time.
So they just accepted you with open arms. I mean, I don't think it's very common for a Westerner to come in and just be accepted as an apprentice, right?
Yeah, well, the apprenticeship wasn't so easy to actually gain. The willingness for them to let me live there was well accepted, but the apprenticeship was actually taboo. There were two real masters in that area of the forest, and one was in his mid-80s at the time that I arrived, and his best student, who was also a grand master, was in his mid-40s at that time. And it was literally taboo to train somebody outside of the blood lineages. And it just happened that they would let me participate in ceremonies with them, but not really train me. They were kind of watching me, more than training me.
Sure.
And there was a period of time when the elder was separated. His name was Julio. Julio was separated from Alberto, and Julio had fallen ill. And there was no one to heal him. And I was passing by his house the day that he fell ill. And I heard him screaming, and I ran up into his house, and I saw the affliction that he was in. It was a wild scenario. It was a kind of a supernatural illness that he was experiencing, and the lower part of one of his legs had swollen 3 times its normal size. Wow. And he was rolling around on the floor in extreme pain. And I started to hear a very clear voice that told me exactly what I needed to do to heal him. And I started to perform a healing on him. And I healed him over the next 4 days. And through that experience, at the end of that, he actually felt like I had saved his life. And he asked me what I wanted in exchange for saving his life, some kind of payment. And so I asked him if he would accept me as an apprentice. And it turned out that he had a conversation that day with Alberto, who was his prize student, and they both agreed to teach me in a debt to having saved Julio's life.
Wow.
And that was the day that my apprenticeship formally started.
Did it scare the shit out of you?
Oh my God. Oh my God. I mean, I had been in ceremonies and stuff like that before, but the day the apprenticeship started was wild. We sat down in a ceremony. They gave me ayahuasca to drink. It's unbelievably potent visionary medicine for those who don't know of it. And I had been in a number of ceremonies before that, but hadn't been, fully initiated. I was just a participant. And something felt dramatically different from the moment that I drank the tea. And it started to feel like it was 1,000 times stronger than normal. And instead of opening up into visions, it felt like I got sucked into a gravitational field that was like a spinning black hole to literally nothingness. And I just got sucked further and further into it in the vision until there was no body, there was no awareness, there was literally nothing other than this crushing gravity. And the last thing I remember was that it literally crushed the life out of me. And I blacked out. I have no idea how long I was blacked out. And then the very next moment, I was sitting in my chair next to the 2 master shamans. There were only the 3 of us in ceremony, and I was sitting in my chair. And my brain was literally different. And I was having an experience where I could hear in the left lobe of my brain, Alberto, and I could hear in the right lobe of my brain, Julio. And I thought I was imagining it. I thought, something dramatically wrong had happened. And, but I could hear them clear as day, that they were literally inside my brain. It was like, from one moment there's you, and the next moment there's 3 people in your head, and 2 of them are sitting next to you. And so I kind of gave it a test. I thought to myself, Julio, I would love a cigarette. And Julio always had mapacha tobacco and cigarettes on him. They all smoked. And so I thought it to that part of where Julio was in my mind. And Julio, sitting next to me, reaches into his pocket and hands me a cigarette without saying a word and starts laughing and goes, ha, 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 like that, as he physically handed me the cigarette. And I just went, oh my God, what has happened? Like, what has happened? I knew I had jumped into the deep end, and there was no coming back. The only way through was to, ultimately train. But that's really how training began. And it started with them literally guiding me from within myself, and, took the next series of years. But it was really an amazing experience and something I feel truly honored and grateful for.
That sounds incredible. That sounds absolutely like a shamanic initiation. Was the ayahuasca indeed more potent, or was it something else that they were doing too?
No, it was what they were doing. It was actually a same batch of ayahuasca we had drunk many times. It was literally that they had caused that scenario, and that was taking me over this sort of mystical or proverbial threshold into their realm.
That's amazing.
It was sort of taking me from the state of consciousness that I had been in previous to that, and taking me into this, other space. It's hard to describe in words. It's another field. It's another aspect of consciousness, and they share it. The shamans share it, and it's a place where amongst them it's known, and unless you get initiated, you're just not part of it. And you have to be, in essence, invited in, or you have to battle your way in, one way or the other, in the Amazon at least. And in this case, I was invited in, which was, like I say, a great honor.
And that's that's an awareness that you will never leave, right? You're kind of tuned into that channel from now on.
Yeah, I mean, that's what you ultimately train in. The way you get trained is through visions themselves. There's no teacher with a blackboard or whiteboard or PDF or PowerPoint or something like that. It's literally through the experience itself. And so training looks like going through lots of initiatory experiences. It's not just one initiatory experience. You go
Sure.
through literally hundreds. And it's spending time in an apprenticeship with the master shamans, walking through the forest with them, spending time sitting with them, listening to their stories, the oral histories, the mythologies, learning their languages, and also then being taught through the visionary experiences in the ceremonies themselves. So they can teach you the plants either in vision, or they can teach you the plants in the forest itself. And they can conjure visions of literally anything. And so they can, you could be in a ceremony in the middle of the night, you enter into a vision, and all of a sudden it's like you're walking on a path through the forest during the day, and they can be pointing out different kinds of plants and explaining to you in the vision what they're used for. And the very next day you could go out on that path and find those plants. It's unbelievable how tuned in they were to their environment, and they're in literal harmony with nature. And so in the ceremonies themselves, the nature is part of the ceremony. The insects will change the sounds that they're making in the forest and start playing different rhythms with them as they chant and as they sing. And they'll go into syncopated rhythms with them, and they'll call different animals, and the animals will literally physically come to the ceremonial house. And it's just an unbelievable connection that they have, and it's a part and parcel of what they understand as their medicine and how they heal people.
That's incredible. So what would you say if somebody asked what the prime role of a shaman was? I mean, they serve lots of roles, right?
Yeah, in the traditional societies, the shaman is a wisdom keeper and also the healer. Sometimes they also held a political role, sort of the leader as well. But there are tribes where the shamans weren't the leaders. They were just literally the healers slash keepers of the oral history traditions and wisdom. So, if you live in a tribal society without a written language, there isn't any way to keep the knowledge base going unless it's shared generation by generation by generation. And so the shaman are the ones that kind of literally use their brains as the encyclopedias. So their brains are jungle Google, so they know all the plants, and then they teach each other all the plants, and they know through the collective evolution of the ceremonies and learning from the forest, what to eat, what not to eat, what plants are medicine, which ones aren't, how to prepare them, which different aspects of the plants to use. And they know hundreds and hundreds of medicinal plants. And so it really is a pharmacopoeia. It's like an incredible pharmacy. And the way the jungle is, it's not monoculture. It's not like you go into a pine forest and you just see tons of pine trees. There's thousands of species in an acre of forest, and so the medicinal plants are all intramixed throughout the forest. So typically within about half a mile of where you're living, you can find all of the medicinal plants that you would need to be able to treat or heal any of the kinds of illnesses that the shaman know how to treat and heal. So they carry the role of the medicine, how to be able to heal people. They function also as peacekeepers within the tribes themselves. They handle disputes amongst people, and they pass on the oral traditions. And they also maintain the balance between the tribe and the supernatural. They're mythologically superstitious people. And so they believe that there is a true source or godliness to the universe, and that the relationship between the people and the tribal people and nature needs to be in a kind of state of harmony and balance, and that it can go out of balance, and then that causes different kinds of problems like famines and illnesses and things like that. And so they're also part of maintaining that balance for the tribe with the environment itself.
Well, what is their cosmology in regards to the afterlife? What do they envision happens after you shed your physical body?
They believe that we're eternal and infinite spirit. And so they think of the body as a period of time of life that is a great miracle. And the miracle is just life itself, not some greater pursuit that you had to become or do, like in the Western sense. In the Western concept, you're born of a family, but literally kind of nothing, and you have to become something to be educated and gain a title and ultimately have a career, and you kind of accumulate throughout your life a kind of status. In the tribal people's understandings, you are an inherent miracle, and the goal is to bring out your natural talents to be able to share those with the tribe itself, and you do so just through life, and that is the entirety of your life is a preparation for the afterlife, and that the ancestors are part and parcel of life and part of the tribe itself, and that's ultimately where you're going. So life is really an initiatory and preparatory process for the afterlife, really the entire time that you're alive. It's not so like in Christian mythology, the good and bads being weighed out of sort of sin and goodness to what's going to happen to you after life. It's not like that. It's more like your true essence or nature will be evolved and emerge during your lifetime, and then you'll go into the afterlife as spirit and live of the continuation to be a kind of spiritual support for the continuation of the tribe, known then as ancestor.
So I don't see any concept of reincarnation being involved in that.
No, they don't have it. They believe that you are incarnate, so you're not going to come back as another human. You're going to continue being you. And so they don't have, like the Eastern philosophies have this very cyclical concept of existence, and the tribal people in the Amazon have a much more linear concept about it.
Gotcha. That makes sense why they would, bloodlines would be so important. Otherwise, if you could reincarnate, then why couldn't a Peruvian shaman be reincarnated as you, an American? But
Sure.
No such concept exists, so that makes sense.
Sure. No, they literally just don't think that way. It's a concept that they don't entertain. Now with the way that, cultures have been shared across the world and people have traveled everywhere and shared different ideas, they talk about reincarnation, and, the general concepts around the shamanism are also evolving. And now there might be shamans that have added that into their own cosmologies. But the fundamental tribal cosmologies were not ultimately based in that idea of cycles. It was more based in a continuous ever presence of life, and the tribe itself evolving over time, generation by generation by generation, forming that idea of lineage.
And I would imagine then there would be some sort of communication that would be where you would be able to communicate with your ancestors.
Absolutely, and that was considered not only a gift of the shaman, but a gift of everybody. Everybody believed that they could communicate with the ancestors. It wasn't specifically part of the tribes I interacted with, but there actually are Amazonian tribes that have a ritualistic practice of taking some of the bones of the ancestors and roasting them to the point of being powder, and then putting them in a ritualistic drink of plantain mash that they call chapo, and actually drinking the bones of the ancestors so that the ancestors would live within the living and continue on in that form. And that wasn't practiced by the people that I interacted with, but I studied that in anthropology, and it really speaks to the nature of how they believe in the continuation of life as a form of lineage.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. So did your anthropological studies end up helping you in this situation, or sort of hindering you? Like, was it too limiting?
Ultimately, the anthropology could provide a certain kind of context. I think it helped in the sense of learning how to understand another culture and try to be able to fit into that culture. So, you're either like the culture or you really kind of stick out like a sore thumb, And so I was about twice the height of the people that I lived with, and a very different shade of skin color.
Sure.
and very different eye color and spoke with a tremendously different accent, so all of those differences obviously made me incredibly different to them. But I learned from anthropology how you really appreciate the culture and appreciate them. And so instead of treating them, as an outsider, I treated them in a very loving, very kind, supportive way that they responded very well to and mirrored back to me. And so I, was humble with them, and I asked them to teach me. And then I acted very childlike in the sense of, pointing at everything and asking them, what is it? What's the name for it? I learned their dialect so I could speak with them in their own tongue. And I think all of those things helped, and that came from anthropology. But really, the anthropology ends at really living there and having to learn how to live there. It's not a study anymore. It's then all of a sudden a lifestyle, and then from there a practice, and then the practice ultimately became, a career for me. And so I think it was very helpful in the beginning of what I was studying, but ultimately there's only so much in shamanism you can observe. And then after that, you really just have to get into it and start learning through the experiences themselves.
Sure. Did you know any Spanish before you went?
I did.
Oh, good.
Funny enough, I knew as a child that I needed to learn Spanish. And so I don't know why, but from about the age of 8, I started studying Spanish. So I asked my mom to find me books and tapes and things like that. Now there are tons of apps to help you learn a language, but back then there were very few tools, especially for a child to be able to learn another language. But I was very interested in learning Spanish, and so I studied it through junior high school and then through the university as well. And then I also lived in Latin America before ultimately going to Peru. So I was able to speak Spanish, enough to get around, but then I really gained fluency in the language by living with the people when I was in the forest.
That's fantastic. How fortuitous. What was I going to say? Oh, yeah. And part of the healing practice of shamans too includes guiding people through experiences with plant medicines. What sort of training, how does one train to do something like that? I have been in ceremony once, only because I've only been presented with one chance that was anywhere remotely near me. And one of the things that kept coming back to me is looking at the shaman and his assistant and going, I can't believe that these people are around this energy all the time. So I have much respect for you, but how do you train to do something like that?
The real answer is little by little.
Sure.
You start by, sitting in ceremonies. And, the first ceremonies I was ever in, I looked at the shamans, and it was one of the first things that I saw that looked truly impossible to be able to even conceive of being able to do. Anything else, it looked like you could at least try it, like learn to scuba dive, okay, there's a class and you can kind of get taught the basics and, go to a math class, and it might be hard, at first, but you might be able to start to grasp it, But when I saw plant medicine ceremonies and what the shamans were doing compared to the physical and mental reactions I was having, it truly looked like an impossibility. I thought it was a great cosmic joke that I had been called to apprentice to something that I would be ultimately a great failure at, because it just looked impossible, Mm-hmm. It was so thunderous. The experience was so overwhelming that there was really no context to be able to understand how to be able to even practice. And so it really is then ultimately little by little, you start to participate in ceremonies, and then you start to do a practice called dietas. And dietas are a time of seclusion and isolation with the plants. And you start to learn from the plants themselves. You eat a very limited series of foods. Most of your normal daily life kind of activities are restricted during that time. You don't have any salts or condiments or spices, anything like that with the foods that you can eat. It's very, very limited amount of calories. It is almost a fast. and you drink different kinds of medicinal plants during that time. Some of them are visionary and some of them are not, but all of them are said to have these teaching spirits or doctor spirits, and that you're going to learn directly from the plants themselves. And the shaman invoke to the spirits the idea that there is a new apprentice and that they're going to start to teach them. And, you kind of have to just go along with it, that, somehow this kind of mystical, magical process is supposed to start. And you start doing dietas and ceremonies, and very much like anything else, little by little, you start to kind of grasp what's going on and understanding more about it. And pretty soon, you find that you can set up through an entire ceremony, and then you can hold a rattle or a shakapa, and you can make it to the end of a ceremony. And they call that creando cuerpo, or building the strength of the body. And then pretty soon the visions start to become clearer, and they're not as chaotic, and they're more melodic, and you start to be able to learn how to focus. And then you start to learn how to understand the chants that the other shaman are singing. And then pretty soon it seems like they're starting to become part of you, and that you know them as well. And you might even start to find that you start whistling them with them, and you're kind of shocked, like how is this actually happening? And little by little by little, and it takes years, over years, you grasp the capacities and build the capacities to ultimately be able to practice. And then you go through, like any other kind of training, a series of tests to make sure that you actually are proficient and capable enough of being able to handle the responsibilities of the ceremonies themselves and the plant medicines. And they can be very unruly. They can be very, very difficult to manage, especially depending on the kinds of illnesses that people have. And so, that's where you really learn to manage the energies so that you can be within those fields and within those kinds of experiences day in, day out, and not be negatively affected by it, because people really are releasing the worst of what they have inside of them. The deepest darkness comes out, the real shadow comes out, the physical illness comes out. It can be, alarming in many different ways, and you have to know how to be able to handle that. And at least in our lineage, you're not considered a graduate or maestro. And maestro just means teacher or master. It's just a title. It's sort of a graduation to where you're allowed to practice on your own. It means you're no longer needing to be in the presence of another maestro of our lineage to be able to be allowed to practice. And you to pass that test, you have to be able to know how to handle all the given scenarios of what a ceremony like that could ultimately bring forth, and know how to handle it on your own. And then you ultimately are given that title and granted the permission to practice on your own.
I just can't imagine. How long have you been in that state of that you've been able to practice on your own? How many years?
In my case, I was given the title and taken over that threshold at the end of 2004, 2005. So I've been practicing on my own for the last 15 years.
Gotcha. Yeah, the time that I did it, it was highly chaotic, very discombobulating, and I felt like I knew from the beginning, because the first hour we were supposed to sit in silence, which is the toughest. And I was just, my goal at that time that I set was to be able to be capable of having a conversation by the end of the night. Because at that point I was so discombobulated, I couldn't even, there was no way I could have talked to anybody. So I felt like I kept one foot in and one foot out, just as sort of getting used to the water, for lack of a better term. But I think the next time I'll go deeper for sure, because I don't feel like I got the whole experience, but now I have an idea of what I would be getting into. So you say that becomes more melodic.
It does, little by little, yeah. And then you also have to expect, for some reason, much more intense nights than other ones. There are some nights that, for whatever reason, are just unbelievably more intense and, kind of earth-shattering. And those take a long time to integrate. They can take years even to integrate. And that's just part of the process. You learn to accept that, and then you use the next series of ceremonies to be able to process it. But I think that's a pretty good intention for night one, that by the end of the night you could have a conversation. Yeah. That's pretty good. I mean, I think that's, I was at the end of night one just hoping to be able to make it through the rest of the night and not soil myself. Yeah, literally, sure. Not kidding, let alone conversation. Yeah. I mean,
of course,
it was so different than anything I had ever experienced the first night. I mean, I had very little context for it. When I got involved in this, there was very little spoken about these kinds of ceremonies and the experiences people had. But the what I had heard and what I had read just seemed impossible that it could be truly that intense. And so I actually thought the authors had, kind of overstated or overplayed the intensity in their own recounting of the experience. And after my first night, I actually flipped in my understanding and realized they had underplayed it.
Yeah,
like exactly. I couldn't believe it. I was like, wow, they were really talking that down. Yeah. I first thought they were like really boasting how intense this was. I remember at 17 minutes into the ceremony, I was sitting out in the forest. It was a really amazing experience. I was by myself with a shaman in the forest. And I was sitting along a river bank that was about 30, 40 meters wide, this little tributary. And so you could see the moonlight and the other side of the trees, like the entirety of the trees up into the canopy. And I was just sitting there under the stars and the moonlight, and I could start feeling this tingling sensation going through my body. And I knew something was starting. And I thought, okay, I can handle this. And then I thought, God, I wonder why people purge from this. It felt so right and so good. I mean, I didn't think I would purge at all. And then at about probably somewhere between 15 and 17 minutes into the ceremony, the rhythm of the shakapa, the leaf rattle that they play that has the shook sound, was really starting to go. And I looked around, and everything became, in seconds, pixelated. And then an intrageometrical web had formed through everything that I could see and was pulsating and moving with the beat of the shakapa from the shaman. And at that point, literally all hell broke loose. I mean, purging out both ends happened. Oh man, like just I had the thought, like, I'm not going to survive this, let alone, like, why would you purge? Like, it was unbelievable. Wow. And then it was a complete life disintegration, recapitulation at almost the speed of light, like, unbelievable. Bushes turned into animals that started talking. There were rainbows exploding out of everything, eyes open, eyes closed, seeing visions. It was, I mean, faster, harder, stronger, more intense, brain working faster, sweating profusely, purging out of both ends, everything happening all at once. I literally thought I would die. I mean, I literally thought there was no way to survive this thing. And, I couldn't believe how fast it just literally took everything over, and still, it's still an unbelievable, it was an unbelievable initiation to that, and made me realize that, it's very hard to describe how ultimately intense these kinds of ceremonies can actually be, especially when you have no frame of reference for it. And the beauty, I think, though, is that it, through our lives, we get presented all of these ideas about spirituality, and we get presented ideas about source and the universe and divinity, and we get presented ideas about spirits and, different kinds of spiritual beliefs and spiritualities. And all of a sudden, that took the veil away, and everything that I had ever heard about was not only a concept, but actually happening right in front of my eyes. And, it made it instantly real. And I think that that's a tremendous gift, to be able to go from something that is entirely conceptual and belief-based to experientially based, literally in the matter of minutes. The time it takes to integrate that, obviously, is more time than it takes to go into it.
Did that experience happen during your training?
That was literally my very first ceremony.
Oh, wow. Holy shit.
Yeah, that was introduction one to, meeting the plants in the forest. That was my very,
Wow.
very first ceremony.
Welcome. Welcome.
Yeah, yeah, definitely welcome. And good luck. That's what I
Yeah.
meant. Like I thought, like there'd be no way to. I thought it was a big joke. Like I honestly did. I had been on this great quest to find this apprenticeship, and the last vision I had in the ceremony was all of the spirits cheering that I had found my apprenticeship and that's what I would ultimately train in. And it just seemed literally impossible. It seemed like something that was just, like I say, a cosmic joke. But after literally years of practice, it ultimately does come together. And you can, if you have both really skilled teachers and an aptitude for it, you can become quite proficient. And, at that point, then it becomes an unbelievable amount of fun. It becomes truly an unbelievable amount of fun to be able to lead and guide ceremonies.
You don't get the jitters pre-ceremony anymore? Or
Uh,
they're different jitters, maybe.
it's different jitters,
Yeah.
It depends on the nature of the work. If I'm going to have a ceremony, and it's just the other master shamans that I practice with, it's a celebration going into the ceremony. There's really no jitters at all. It's when you have 30, 40 people that you've never met before, or you've only met a few of them before. You're going to go into a room with them and share this with them for the first time, and it really is an unknown of what they're going to experience, and they're coming with great expectations for what they're trying to achieve and heal. It's very easy to feel not only their jitters but also the excitement of what's going to come next. It's really quite an amazing ride to hold space for 20 to 40 people at a time, and manage that expression of the visionary medicines and the plants, all in one massive ceremony, and go on that ride. So that can definitely still cause some jitters. I would think that if it ever didn't, something I don't know, would have kind of dramatically changed about how sacred it really is and what an honor it really is to share that space, because you're tapping in ultimately to this great mystical force and this great force of nature, and there's no way to pre-know what's going to happen. So you have to kind of be ready for the big game. You got to be ready for whatever's going to happen, and I think that kind of uncertainty always has a certain edge associated with it, but you learn to manage it. Early on it would cause heart palpitations and anxiety and heavy breathing and sweating and all sorts of stuff, but over time it becomes more excitement than fear. But that did take a number of years.
I could imagine. I mean, not only because of the sheer number of people participating in a ceremony like that, but coming from with all different kinds of expectations or reasons. Like maybe somebody's doing it because they heard that Sting did it, and somebody's doing it because they just got diagnosed with terminal cancer. Like all of those energies in one space has got to be really challenging to navigate sometimes, I would imagine.
Exactly. I mean, everyone's there for different reasons, and they're all serious in one way or another. If you go into the ceremonies and it's going to be just for exploration, you're getting ready to explore well outside the normal box that you've been living in. So even just exploration as an intention is quite intense. But at least at our center, most people come for a kind of transformation that they're looking for. So it's a kind of learning and a transformation or a kind of healing. And so there's, in essence, a lot riding on it. It's not just to try something out for most of the people. And so, especially when you're dealing with something as kind of amorphic as spirit is, you can't really demand a vision, and you can't really just demand that it works. And so, there's a lot of petition and hope that the spirit will always be there and always be willing to support in the idea of the transformation that people are looking for, and vast enough to be able to handle that wide array of situations that people are bringing to the ceremony.
Sure. Well, tell us about your center. Blue Morpho is what it's called, right?
Yeah, we started Blue Morpho back in 2002. And we continued holding ceremonies in the Amazon until COVID. And in March, we were shut down. The whole country was shut down. It wasn't just us, but the entire country went into a national state of emergency. And borders were closed, and Blue Morpho was closed for the first time in 18 years.
Wow.
And so that was it. So we did our last ceremonies at the center in February, and then COVID happened, and it was an unbelievable disrupt. It's been a wild year. It's been a really wild year.
From what I've heard, that it was pretty intense in Peru. What kind of a lockdown was it?
Absolutely total. There was first of all, there was a national state of emergency that was called, and then mandatory quarantine. And the quarantine was total. And it turned out that where the city that we're closest to in the Amazon is a city called Iquitos. And Iquitos is an unbelievably remote city. It's the largest city in the world, only accessible by water or by air. There are no roads into the city. And there's about somewhere between 450, 500,000 inhabitants in the city. And it's in a very small geographic area. It's very high density. And we were hoping that the quarantine was going to start before anyone was infected, but it turned out that there was an infected tourist that infected a guide. And the guide became patient zero. And within a week of the quarantine, COVID was found in every district of the city. And within 2 months, it had taken over the city. And the response was dramatic, literally dramatic. There were food shortages, medicine shortages, the hospitals collapsed. There were literally uncountable deaths. Every single family I know has lost somebody to COVID.
Really?
Yes.
Crazy.
Yeah, literally every single family I know. Over 95% of the city, of all the inhabitants, were exposed to COVID. The city was put under this, quarantine and basically martial control. It was a military/police control of the city. Every major intersection / district was quarantined from the other districts. There was strict rules around the movement of when you could ultimately access sort of what were considered essential services. And other than that, literally everything was shut down. And it was an absolute disrupt. 100%. And then it was survival. And really, it's been very tragic and very sad. People not only died of COVID, but they also died of other complications during the COVID epidemic. There was also a dengue fever breakout, and then that also claimed a number of lives as the hospitals were collapsed and the dengue fever couldn't be treated. And, so it was an unbelievable time of difficulty and tragedy. And the city barely survived. There was a period of time of a certain amount of frustration and trauma and unrest, but ultimately the government was able to stabilize the city, and then now it's recovering. Now that so many people have gotten sick, that literally there's herd immunity for now within the city, and there's almost no COVID now. It sort of has passed because of the vast majority of the people that had been exposed to it. And then the big question that everyone's facing now is, will this, continue as a form of immunity, or, will the antibodies ultimately, no longer exist within the bodies, and then another wave of COVID will hit? No one knows. And so that's kind of the big watch now, the big waiting period to see. And other than that, now the city is operating almost normally. And, there are other parts of Peru right now that are being hit harder. But we really were the first area to go through the big wave. And I've never experienced anything like it. It was unbelievably dramatic and traumatic and, also very sad. We've had so many loved ones pass on during this period of time. we as a group turned to the shamanic practices and the natural medicine as a way of staying healthy through the process, and everybody within our company stayed COVID free. So it was really kind of an amazing time, and we used the shamanic practices with literally all of our employees. We all got together and decided to use the process of dieta and the process of the medicinal plants to both boost the immune system and try to take the plants that are natural antivirals, and then also utilize the ceremonies as a way of processing the trauma in real time to deal with the uncertainty and the fear and also the amount of loss that everyone was experiencing.
It seems strange that your center wouldn't be considered an essential business, an essential service, because it's not like it's a spa or a resort or something like that. You are doing, it's a healing place amongst many other things. Why weren't you guys allowed to stay open?
Just simply that, shamanic practices of medicine just aren't. I was trying to think of the right word for it. It's just not considered essential. It's as simple as that. I'm trying to think. There is an actual word for it. It's not recognized by the Western medical institution, so it's not recognized by the National Ministry of Health. And so all of the traditional healing centers were ultimately shut down during this period of time.
Interesting. I guess
Yeah.
I just imagine that because obviously, I mean, a place like yours can exist, that there seems to be some acceptance of all of that. So it seems like, as a tradition and as a practice that's been going on for thousands of years, that, it would just be considered, you would be respected and seen as a place of importance. So that's just odd. Is there any hope of opening again before the end of the year?
I really don't think so. It's unknown still. The government has said that they're thinking about opening borders within the next couple months, but it's not just going to be unrestricted practice of the government has been putting out a kind of rollout of testing and different plans, and I know that the kind of intra-governmental coalitions have been just discussing how to handle this. It's an unprecedented situation that they're facing. And so, everyone's just being very patient and, trying to understand what the next movements are. And fundamentally, I think, there's a big question around just safety and how to be able to operate now in the post-COVID space. And so I'm not sure when and or if we'll ever be able to open again. It's still a great unknown.
Well, is there anything that you guys are doing in the interim? Are you offering any sort of online courses or retreats?
Yeah, we have. We've started a practice called the Trinity Retreat, and we offer it through bluemorphoretreats.world. And Maestro Christian, who's another master shaman that I trained along with Maestro Alberto, and I are hosting online retreats. And I started to do online work back in 2014 before there was even live streaming on Facebook and YouTube and things like that. We created our own live streaming broadcast channel so that we could try to share shamanism and these practices with people that just literally couldn't come to the Amazon. And so we've been streaming for the last 6 years. So for us, it was actually quite a natural transition. And so we got together and tried to come up with what we thought would be ultimately the most impactful way to recreate the retreat experience inside your own home. And so the Trinity Retreat combines 3 core practices. We do shamanic dieta utilizing local edible herbs and flowers that are legal and available literally wherever you are in the world. And we teach you how to be able to utilize them just like we do in the Amazon, to have communication with the plant, to be able to make it part of your living being, a true spiritual connection with the plant, to be able to learn wisdom and healing from the plant, and to have it fulfill our healing intentions. And then we combine different body practices. And so we teach yoga and qigong and our own practice that we developed and invented that we call flow chi. And we combine that with shamanic ceremonies, just like we would hold in the Amazon, but we use different kind of ecstatic breathing techniques and other kinds of visionary plants that are also legal wherever you are in the world, like cacao and kava kava. And so we, have modified the nature of the experience so that people can still get healing and get the spiritual connection they're looking for. And we're actually, finding that we're having an unbelievably powerful response from the participants in the ceremonies. We actually finished a retreat last night. It was an unbelievable last 3 days. We were working with people from over 20 countries, all connected by the internet and all going through this process. And so we share detox to teach people how to be able to detox the body and boost the immune system, how to be able to use, local medicinal plants, and, to be able to boost your health, especially in this time where health is so important.
That's amazing. Well, we'll definitely have links to your site on the episode notes for sure. Do you think that something like an ayahuasca ceremony can really properly translate within a different context? Like when I did it, it was in a it was in a basement in Kansas, and not just a dank basement. It was fixed up. It was really nice and comfortable and pleasant to be in, but it didn't have, the energetic context that these plants come from. So do you think that there's that actually affects the experience? And if so, does it matter, or does it just make it different?
Oh, I think it's a really good question. I think if you have the opportunity to be able to experience the plants in their native location, you're going to have an experience unlike, the experience anywhere else. It's going to be, from the origins of the locus where it was, created and invented and made and part and parcel of the culture, etc. But I ultimately think that the plant medicines are medicines in their own right. And what's more important is the practitioner. And to understand that the shaman is not just a server of the plants and then the plants do the work. The shaman is really part and parcel of the guiding of the experience. And so it's important to, first of all, have, really good plants that are, well made and safe, and, that the origin of them and where they were created or elaborated. And then it's also really important to know the shaman that you're working with and that they have a really good intention and training to be able to support you and help you through the experience. And then I think third comes the nature of the setting. And if, the reality is that the medicines have traveled now all over the world. And so there are ceremonies in, every single kind of environment. And I would like to think that what's really important is the visionary experience more so than, specifically where you are. Although I think that the energy around you will definitely impact the ceremony. When you're in an ayahuasca ceremony in the Amazon, there are all of the different doctor spirits that are from the forest that are part and parcel of the medicine experience that the shamans wield for the healing. It's not just the visionary plants. They're calling on, like I said, hundreds of different kinds of medicinal plants and spirits from the forest to come to that ceremony, to be able to help you in that ceremony. And the people in the ceremony interact with them, see them, and they come from the forest. And so if you're in, an urban environment and, I don't know, like I hear of ceremonies all the time in these large cities, you're surrounded by the city, you're not surrounded by that same forest. And so I think that there's going to be a difference, but I wouldn't say that the difference is so different that I would only recommend doing a ceremony in the Amazon. I think that it's more important if you are in need of support from these kinds of ceremonies to be able to find really responsible people who know how to practice them and ultimately receive them where you can. And the other side of it is legality. I think, when you're in a place where it's legal to do them, that's the most important thing, just simply because there's a natural calmness associated with that, there isn't anything clandestine going on, and that you're, ultimately, just kind of in a clean space with it all. So I think that those are really the main recommendations, but really being with people who are, experienced and practiced, and understanding that the shaman has a really important role to the overall outcome of the ceremony that you're going to have, especially with the Amazonian visionary plants. They're, very intense. And so the more the intense the plant is, I think the more important the role of the shaman is in terms of making sure that they can guide you to a positive outcome.
Fantastic. Well, we are rounding up on an hour here. I hope that you guys are able to open up sooner rather than later, and I also hope that I am able to come on to a retreat at Blue Morpho, because it sounds incredible.
Well, I really appreciate that. I mean, you'd be more than welcome, and we too hope that at some point things are going to smooth out and things will go back to normal. And until then, we're really just glad that we can reach people on the virtual retreats, and that we can continue this work. And, just really glad that there is a means still to be able to practice, even though we're in these unprecedented times.
Absolutely. Can you tell the listeners where they can find you and your center online?
Yeah, absolutely. So go to bluemorphoretreats.world, and we have a website that can guide you to how to sign up for one of our retreats. And we have a Trinity Scholarship Program. And so, especially during this time, we felt that it was really important that regardless of how you're doing economically, for you to be able to participate. And so there are people who donate to the scholarship program, and then that allows us to be able to offer retreats to absolutely everybody. So funding is not a reason to or a barrier of entry to be able to participate. So regardless of your economic situation, you're welcome to participate in our retreats, and we would love to have you come. And you can email us also at info@bluemorphoretreats.world.
Cool. Morpho with a PH or an F?
PH, MORPHO, retreats.world.
Fantastic. Hamilton, thank you so much for having this conversation. I hope that we can have more in the future. I just dipped into the tip of the iceberg of my question list. So if you're up for it, maybe sometime in the near future, we can do it again.
Absolutely. I would love to. I'd love to speak with you again. It's a pleasure speaking with you, and I really enjoyed being on your podcast. So let's do it sooner than later. I'd love to.
Absolutely. Until then, I wish you the best down there, and take care of yourself.
Thank you. You too, and everybody. Let's stay safe and healthy, and continue to share in this incredible life. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Yes. Have a good rest of your evening, Hamilton.
All right. You too. Thank you.
Yeah. Take care. Very interesting conversation with Hamilton. I have read about shamanism for years decades actually, and have long been fascinated with the role of shamans in different cultures. And it's true. It is definitely not a glamorous position. They are often outcasts. They are often a caste in and of themselves that isn't necessarily high on the rung. But they are absolutely invaluable to these cultures, and to this day, to many cultures, as a sort of a go-between the material world and the spiritual world, as you heard Hamilton talk about. And I plan to have him on again, because there's lots more to map in the area of shamanism and ayahuasca as sort of a medicinal therapeutic undertaking. As I alluded to in the episode, I did try it probably about a year and a half ago, close to a year and a half ago. Seems like it's a lot longer. No, what am I thinking? It's probably more like 2.5 years ago. And it was, as I said, very intense, so intense that I kind of kept a foot in the world of the linear, the world of the definable, because it was so intense and scrambled and overwhelming at first that I couldn't make any sense of it. I couldn't see any real shapes or forms or anything. It was like static, almost technicolor static. And I didn't find that all too pleasing. I think I went into it rather, let's say, well informed. I'd been researching ayahuasca for a long, long time, and I had the utmost respect for the plant. And I knew it was the most powerful hallucinogen on earth that we know of. And it was all that. Absolutely. I would like to do it again if I got the opportunity, but I think I would rather go someplace like Blue Morpho. I think that would be something that I would get a lot more out of than in a basement in Kansas. And, you know, the setting was perfectly fine, but it wasn't a jungle. We were inside of a building, and there wasn't that much connection to the greater context. So it was sort of disappointing on that front. But anyway, I recommend it for those of you, as he said, if you have the calling, or maybe I heard it in one of the interviews that I listened to before I did this episode, but if you have the calling, if you have the curiosity and the respect to come to this plant, perhaps you should try it. And it is dangerous. It's important to do your research. There are physical things that can happen and mental and psychological things that can happen too, so it's nothing to undergo lightly by any means. And it certainly is not for everybody. I hope that you have enjoyed this episode and were able to glean something from it. If you would like to help support the Melt, there are various ways that you can do that. I've been getting a lot of traffic on Patreon, and it's been so wonderful that people are willing to step up and support the Melt in a very tangible financial way, because that is sort of the basis for everything else. I've got to be able to keep the wheels of the Melt turning, therefore to pay the basic bills that I need to do that. So that helps for sure. You can go to www.patreon.com/themeltpodcast, and you can find different ways and different amounts that you can contribute monthly. You can do it for as low as $1. It doesn't matter. You get this. It's this all in the same tier, basically. All that is. All the parameters there are is that it starts at $1. It can't be below $1 per month. And hopefully this is worth it enough to you. I at this point, I have 2 episodes per month that come out. But one of the main reasons is that I just don't have time, because I've got to earn money in other ways, to devote that much time to this podcast, which I really would prefer to do. I would prefer to have more time and energy to put into the Melt. So that's something that will happen as more Patreon people come and help. That will help to maybe allow me to use this as a job, as opposed to the occupations and odd jobs that I've been doing throughout the decades that have gotten me this far. I would prefer to do this, though. So that helps for sure. Sharing it on your social media data harvesting context of choice is also very, very helpful. Send a link to the whole website. Send a link to a particular episode. Sharing it with your friends and family via email, word of mouth, that also helps too. And it sounds insubstantial, but good vibes help. Sending good thoughts to the Melt's way is definitely something that helps. For sure. Listen to the Dean Radin episode if you don't think that's true. All right. Thank you very, very much. I've got shows pretty much lined up through the rest of the year, and none of them are duds by any means. They're all fantastic, and I'm looking forward to releasing them to you all. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time, take care.